It is SIGGRAPH, so we're getting professional graphics releases here. This is an interesting story, and this is an interesting product that I did not expect. This is the Radeon Pro SSG, and it's blue.
That's the wrong color.
What? This is an Intel video card now.
No. That is the same shade of blue that was a recently created shade of blue that had never been seen before.
Well, Intel's blue is lighter. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wait, what are we talking about?
But recently
just the
created
color.
for what? Only this, right?
So here's what this graphics card is. It is as it turns out, a Fiji GPU.
Okay.
I don't know of what capacity necessarily, but it is using a PCI Express bridge, the 8747 bridge chip. And on board, it has two PCIe M.2 by 4 SSDs to accommodate up to 1 terabyte of NAND flash storage.
But it's doing it through
let me ask you
bridge?
this. No, I mean, does XDMA, can you adjust it to be able to access storage like this?
XDMA.
I don't know.
What do you mean?
Okay, so you've got
Like through
memory controllers,
through
right?
Windows, or
And so an M.2 is essentially a controller
yeah.
on PCIe.
Well,
You've got two graphics chips or one graphics chip.
Yep.
How is the memory controller or I/O going to access that as compared to just having PCIe that can access the frame buffer of another card or main memory?
Okay. I think
How
I know
do
where
you change that around to be able to access M.2 SSD?
It's, the important question to ask is that M.2 SSD visible to Windows?
I would guess not.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Right? It's from the 8K video editing demo, the dual Samsung 950 Pro PCIe SSDs in RAID 0, mind you, on board the Radeon Pro SSG card hit 4 gigabytes per second while scrubbing through video. That same video source stored on a Samsung 950 Pro attached to the motherboard had throughput of 900 megabytes.
But you're saying the source is stored on it and they're scrubbing through it, so the SSDs would have to be visible to the OS.
No. The same
it
video
has to be
source
visible
stored
to
on
the VBIOS and to the driver of the GPU.
Hold on. Where's the videos?
So they're talking about, in the first example, they say it's on board the Radeon Pro SSG and it hit 4 gigabytes per second. The same video source stored on the drive attached to the motherboard did 900 megabytes per second.
Oh.
Right? So they're not saying that they're
Okay.
both
so it is
Windows.
okay. So it's well, that means that they would have had to have somehow added in the firmware for it to be able to do NVMe, issue NVMe commands directly to the SSDs.
Yeah, but that's got to be the GPU.
That's what I'm saying.
Controlling that stuff.
Yeah.
If it's not the GPU controlling that stuff, I don't see what the benefit is.
Right. And what I'm saying is like, if the host
Because
system doesn't see
it used that 1 terabyte as a local frame buffer.
Yeah.
That it's doing stuff to.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's still GPU memory on the card.
Right. But I'm just saying.
And it still has to copy it back and forth
Yeah.
between the SSD and the GPU memory.
Right. But what I'm saying is that those are NVMe SSDs.
Yes.
So they will have to have added that logic to be able to communicate.
Yeah, because even though if
NVMe
you
stuff.
put those SSDs on the card, but you did not have the logic on the GPU to access it, so when the GPU has to access something, it has to go out to the CPU, to the main memory, and back, and then access those SSDs on there. It doesn't matter because it's all PCIe.
Right. But that would be
Correct.
slower.
Yeah, and so you've got multiple jumps, but obviously the GPUs are just accessing these things directly.
They have to be accessing them directly.
They've got to, otherwise it's just the latency kind of blows it up for what the testing that they're doing. I mean, not like PCIe is low, high latency, but
Sure.
Where are they getting this extra performance from?
There's a line Tim added after the fact that says, on the prototype Radeon Pro SSG, the M.2 slots are actually able to be seen as drives by the system and OS. So it is essentially acting as if there was a PCIe adapter card and a slot on the motherboard holding those drives, but that may not be the case when this product actually hits the market.
So if the demo was doing it that way, then the performance difference they saw doesn't make sense.
I would agree. 4 gigs per second versus 900 doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know exactly. They're talking about
because if they were only visible through
it had 4 gigabytes per second while scrubbing through the video, so I don't know what metric that is. Like, what is actually measuring that?
And they compared it to, I guess, a single of them on the system?
On a motherboard, yeah.
Because the thing is, if they had two together... Okay, so if you had a pair of M.2 SSDs visible to the system as slave drives...
Yep.
Right? You could RAID... How would you put them together? Because you're going to RAID them.
0.
I don't mean the method.
Oh.
You're going to do it with Windows RAID.
Yeah, because there's no hardware chip that's going to be doing
you
RAID.
can't do Z170 RAID.
Okay, yeah.
So you're going to tie them together with Windows RAID. I hate to say it, that gives you a caching advantage because Windows RAID like throws a lot of RAM into the mix on how it's like dealing with its reads. So like it's not the best for random writes and stuff like that. Windows RAID kind of falls on its butt. But like for sequential reads or scrubbing like large random reads, which are going to look like sequential, it's going to go fast.
My question is, I guess, and I need to find somebody at AMD to ask this. In its current form, is there any difference from this being on the graphics card versus being on the motherboard, other than you go to a purchasing agent at your company and say, I want to buy the Radeon Pro SSG, and it just shows up
and then
as
you
plug it in and everything's ready to go.
Yeah.
Right? Because
you couldn't boot from that.
I don't think Fiji has an NVMe SSD controller built into it.
I don't think it does either.
I don't think it does. And
I think it could.
I think a future GPU could.
Yeah.
Right?
But I don't think that one does, and I really don't see the motivation to push that hard for it if they're already getting, well, look how much faster it is if you do that. But yeah, I'd say
and that's just that could just be a marketing. Hey, we're trying to build some excitement about it. But
it shouldn't be any different than if you got a.
Okay, if you tear this card apart and you find one of those chips that takes a 16 by PCIe 3 connection and then puts it into two different 16 by that we've seen. What is the I can't remember
Josh, there's chips that will
PLX.
What it's doing is it's a 16 by on the slot side. They're going 8 lanes to the GPU, and then they're splitting up the other 4 and 4 to the other 2 SSDs. Like that's a typical layout for one of those kind of multi or PLX chips, which is what's on there.
How does it explain the far more than doubling the performance in that operation?
I was just explaining that because if in that prototype unit it was visible to the OS, they were just using Windows RAID.
Okay, which
does give you some boost. Now,
AMD claims it can access local memory over the M.2 interface at much lower latencies than it can pull data from the PCI Express bus.
Now that wouldn't be talking about the prototype unit.
God, I hate this website.
Right?
Yeah, but that's essentially what is XDMA? Direct memory access.
Sure, but if it's NVMe, you still need the like.
You know what? If you can hard code it, you may not need NVMe. I mean, think about the software overhead and the things that you can do if you have an XDMA type chip that you can kind of expand. I get where
you're coming from.
I know it's a jump, and I don't know enough technical stuff to tell you this, but
I get where you're coming from. But if they said they're using 950 Pros. Like they just said that's what they're using. There's 2 950 Pros on that thing.
God,
you can't. There is no direct jump over the. There is no jump over the NVMe thing for those. If you're talking to them over PCI, which is the only way to connect them, it has to be NVMe command set. Like that's the only way you can speak to 950 Pros. Maybe some other future thing with, proprietary SSDs on it or something. But right now, it has to be NVMe. And also right now, I know of no way that an NVMe device will just share with something else. Like you have your, main system that it negotiated with that has a driver installed. That's the thing it's talking to. I know of no just like, and also I'm going to talk to this GPU in parallel, right? Because if they're visible to the OS and the GPU tried to sideload some textures to it or something, like there's just not a mechanism in place on the SSD side.
the Anantech story has some interesting data, right? So they talked to Raja. It is architecturally, the prototype is essentially a PCIe SSD adapter and a video card on a single board with no special connectivity in use beyond what the bridge chip provides.
Okay.
The SSDs themselves are a pair of 512 gig 950 Pros. The OS actually sees the SSD RAID 0 array as well, at least in this prototype design. To use the SSDs, applications need to be programmed using AMD's APIs to recognize the existence of the local storage and that it is, quote, special, being on the same board as the GPU itself.
Okay.
Ultimately, the trick for application developers is directly streaming resources from the SSDs, treating it as a level of cache between the DRAM and the system storage.
So that would mean that something on the card has to be able to issue the NVMe, like read commands from that storage.
To do
MDA, or to do MDMA, like Josh is saying. Because that's kind of what it would be doing.
Yeah. So
without
it's faster.
going through
It's not as fast as accessing system memory, but it's faster than accessing system storage, even if it's a PCIe SSD somewhere else on the system. Because there are less hops. There's
less hops.
Yeah.
The thing is,
I mean,
though,
if the CPU is controlling it like NVMe stuff,
that's where I still see a rub, because NVMe is super low latency, even if you are going the long way. Like, that's the whole idea of NVMe. That's why it was invented.
Yeah.
To it's like the DX12 for SSDs. It's like super low latency, as low as you could possibly get. Right.
Okay. So Ryan Smith says here the performance difference between the 4 gigs and the 900 megs per second. He points out that the 4 gigs versus the 900 megs per second, which is slower than what we know the 950 Pro can do in sequential reads.
Yeah.
Right. After putting some thought into it, Ryan thinks that the AMD has hit upon the fact that most M.2 slots on motherboards are routed through the system chipset rather than directly to the CPU.
You still get higher than 900.
900 is pretty close to 1,000, which would be by
the
far
max
PCIe
DMA
2.
for Intel
2000.
chipsets.
Over PCI 2.0?
I
don't think so. It adds other hops of latency, but it means crossing the narrow DMI 3.0.
Yeah, DMI 3.0 is like 2 gig per second.
So this is, I think,
I don't know.
It's an interesting product, but I think it needs to go further than this if it's going to be truly revolutionary. Because, like, I don't know, everybody on Twitter this day, like, if you read the semi-accurate stories, talking about how this is going to change everything in the world.
No.
And if they build a GPU that has an SSD controller on it, then maybe you have a discussion.
Yeah.
Right? This is not that.
Right.
This is definitely not that. It's essentially one card that you can plug in.
And there's another reason that I really don't think they would go to that level. You want to know why? It's
Sure.
actually a pretty big one. We have yet to see an NVMe hardware RAID controller. There does not exist one.
Well, you could do, I mean, even if you had a single drive NVMe controller.
Sure, single, right?
But they want to still do it.
They want to use 2, right?
I think they were using 2 because they needed to see some impressive numbers in this prototype stage.
I'll give you that, but it would be a shame to see the actual retail product come out with 1 when the prototype had 2.
But if it's actually accessing memory faster,
I guess.
Right.
But if you only have 1 now, you're limited in throughput. Like, you know, but like there's devices you can get, like HP's making parts that have up to 4 M.2. They come with 4 like equivalent of 950 Pros. They're the OEM version.
Yeah.
Right? But there's 4 on there, but guess what? No RAID. It's like a freaking $6,000 thing or something like that that people are buying, but the drives show up individually. You have to RAID them in the OS, right?
Yep.
So if nobody can do this with a pure storage device, some GPU maker is not just going to come on and go, oh, we figured out the magic. We can just RAID these 2
but I don't think
NVMe
they have to do RAID.
SSDs.
I would say that they wouldn't.
They just individually talk to both or something?
Or, yeah, they could do that. Especially, yeah, they could definitely do that.
Like kind of software RAID within the GPU or something, I guess.
Because if they're using their own custom APIs and shit, then...
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a really interesting design, and it was something totally kind of out of left field when they had it.
It is definitely interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this content, consider supporting in-depth technical content by contributing at patreon.com/PCPer.